Majhdhar is basically the center of the stream, the most powerful current in the river. We plan to bring people from opposite sides of the spectrum closer to each other in an attempt to understand a perspective that is different from theirs. In a world increasingly divided in its views, this event exists to smash the echo chamber that the internet can be. Meet new people, defend your position, change your perspectives, and move forward with your ideas forged stronger through the fires of debate.
I think we were inspired by the middle ground, which is in the YouTube channel of Jubilee. And basically, it'll be really beneficial because we reach a compromise in these very hard times and all these polarizing times with all these controversial and contentious issues. Not only do we learn about compromise, that's a completely open environment. It's we learn about open-mindedness. We learn how to accept other people's other people's perspectives, and we also learn how to convince others of our perspective and basically make compelling arguments, and it's a completely non-judgmental environment. So I think that's a really good thing about Majhdhar.
So the topic we're going to be debating today is censorship in the creative industry. So before we begin, we're going to have an icebreaker question. So the statement is a hot dog a sandwich? Yeah, Dia, why don't you begin?
I mean, honestly, I think we could have our own middle ground session on that itself as one topic. But seeing that most sandwiches are essentially any kind of stuffing in the middle of pieces of bread, I think I'd take my chances and say that a hot dog is a sandwich.
Maurya?
I would also agree with Dia there. I think it is a subversion of a sandwich. I think the only difference would be that it isn't split right till the end. And yeah, but I think it also a lot of matters about the way you put it in a context. So, a hot dog is similar to the context of having a sandwich, like a to-go snack or something like that.
I do not believe a hot dog is a sandwich, and saying such is not true at all, given the cultural context which we've created around the hot dog. If you go to a hot dog stand and you ask a hot dog vendor to give you a sandwich, they'll look at you. They'll be a bit confused before you have to explain to them that you're asking for before you have to explain to them that you're asking for a hot dog. It might fit the definition of the word sandwich, but because of the cultural context we've created for the hot dog, it's become its own entity.
Okay, so then I guess we can begin with our debate. As you all know, I'm going to be reading out a statement. Everyone who agrees will raise their hand. They will then have a minute to speak. And then once they're done, the people who disagree will have a minute to speak. So let's begin. The first statement is, I believe censorship is never justified. Everyone who agree, raise your hand. Okay, Ishana, why don't you go?
Sure. I think that the purpose of art is to evoke emotion out of the audience. It's to imprint meaning into their minds and be a free form of expression. And censoring art is basically the equivalent of censoring a person's own mind and preventing them to freely express themselves on the internet or anywhere for that matter. Basically, censorship alienates people from what they actually believe in, and it alienates people from the world and causes marginalized groups to be even less visible than they were before. After all, free speech is one thing that we pride ourselves on, and it's what sets us apart from civilizations of the past and what propels us to advance as a species in the future too. So every act of censorship is also an act of iconoclasm, which is basically the action of attacking or assertively rejecting cherished beliefs and institutions of established values and practices. So technically, by censoring stuff, we're kind of censoring our own beliefs, which is kind of a hypocrisy. So yes, I do not think censorship is justified.
What about those who are against the statement? Who wants to speak up? Yeah, Dia.
While I do agree with a lot of the points that Ishana made, I do think it's important to acknowledge the fact that sometimes that freedom of speech can be misused by people, in the sense that hate speech can severely impact or damage the identity or the perception of various individuals and communities. With that being said, I think it's important to understand the degree to which the censorship is being allowed. And I don't think it's okay to completely infringe someone's ideas and creativity, but at the same time, if it can potentially harm someone's um it can harm someone's life or hurt their emotions in some way, I think it is important to apply those breaks then in that case. With that being said, a huge aspect of how we've evolved as a civilization is also the importance of being politically correct, and it is important to be respectful towards others. Definitely, it's not okay to like talk about things at the cost of, again, affecting others negatively, but I do think that censorship in some cases is necessary, it is important, and it should be allowed and not looked upon negatively.
Okay, so I'm going to read out the second statement. I have personally been offended by a particular work of art. Ritika, why don't you go?
I have personally been offended by a particular piece of art, not just one. There have been many pieces of art, there have been movies, there have been books, there have been many things which have offended me. But I feel that's what art is supposed to do. It's supposed to open up conversations. It's not about morality and immorality, it's about good or bad. So something which may offend me may not offend someone else. So being offended is subjective, uh, and it can't be censored. So if I find it offensive and I censor it, someone else may not find it offensive. So I have been offended, but I do not believe in censorship, and I think that there should be a free flow and exchange of ideas between the audience and the artist.
Yeah, Moria.
Yeah. So I personally have never been offended with a piece of art because I think that the fundamentals of art is not to offend but to provoke. And I think just adding on to what my other fellow delegate was speaking is that, you can't curb subjectivity. And the mere fact that art is not there to be forced upon, you're not forced to look at art. You're not required to understand art or understand whatever message is trying to say. Just the nature of the fact that you choose to look at art does not make it a strong enough reason in order to censor it, because if you choose to do it, you can choose not to do it as well. You can choose not to, let's say, look at a piece of art or understand it if you don't have a political inclination towards it. So I think the whole fundamentals of censorship and steering certain people in a certain direction is really flawed because it's so subjective, and people often tend to forget that they have a choice not to act as well.
Okay, I think we can move on to the third statement. Artists have a responsibility to ensure that they do not promote messages which may create disharmony in society or offend a particular social group. Why don't you speak, Rishabh?
Artists generally do have a responsibility to not ensure that this societies become divided upon seeing their piece of art. I do not really art is not consumed in a vacuum, nor do people believe that after seeing an art they won't just respectfully acknowledge that there might be a difference of opinions with art. They might get violent over it, and we have seen this countless time after time. And and governments do recognize this, people do recognize it, which is why art has been censored or restricted in the past to prevent such mass hysteria. And we can see countless examples of this. Innocent USSR movies have been censored because they promoted the authoritarianism of the USSR. Mein Kampf has promoted the Nazi government, which caused the unspeakable horrors of the Holocaust or any of its concentration camps. And artists generally are ignorant to whatever problems they cause, simply because they want to create art. And artists need to acknowledge that their pieces of art can lead to other people not other people acting out in violent ways.
Right. So, what I think is that it's now becoming more and more obvious that the motive behind this extreme level of censorship of artists on social media like Instagram and Twitter and all these other social media platforms is basically the fear of offending anybody. And as if by removing artistic expression will somehow create the environment where all users will get along and will never have to deal with any offense or any opinion that's not theirs. And this just leads to an echo chamber where everybody agrees to what everybody else is saying and nobody really opposes it, and this causes the solution this causes a society to not evolve, and they just sit on what they think is correct even though it might correct it doesn't have to be correct or wrong. It's just that nobody evolves and everybody's just sitting on the same point of view. And I also feel like I mean, who knows how many brilliant ideas are silenced because they no longer have a platform on which they can be released. And the consequences of these of censorship is that it limits people to be themselves and to share their knowledge and experience with others. And if censorship is taken to such extremes, when will it end? Like, there's no limit to it.
Okay. Censorship is curtailing an individual's freedom of speech and expression.
So censorship essentially can restrict a person's freedom of expression, but I think that is justified because in every country, the freedom of speech and expression is limited. If the freedom causes communal harm, if it causes communal damage, then I think it should be censored to protect the society from greater conflict. So I think that in some contexts where to protect the society from harm, it is important to censor this work of freedom.
I do not believe that censorship curtails the freedom of speech, and in some ways, it can actually directly enhance the freedom of speech because it prevents bad faith actors from polluting the common discourse with their politically motivated agendas. In Like for example, in the case of a violent, you can't really reason with a violent mob, nor can you really reason with active with people with insidious beliefs. And in those cases, you really have to acknowledge that the only way to in those cases you have to acknowledge that you have to get rid of discourse like this, otherwise it can promote violence against people and then curtail their right to speak out. So you're preemptively just blocking people from talking from breaking societal norms.
Okay, so the last statement is I was surprised in a good way by one of the responses I heard today, and I understand the other side's views and arguments.
Yeah, I never really realized how important it is to have some sort of non-violent conflict of opinions and have a discussion about things. The idea of peace and harmony, as utopian and as ideal as it is to a certain extent going to stop us from evolving and stop us from growing as individuals as well. And I think yeah, I mean the nature of this platform does sort of allow for like controversial opinions to be expressed in a civilized manner, but I think it's important for like each person to be sort of a little aware of themselves and of the world around them and to be okay with like accepting other opinions as is on this platform. So I never really thought of that, and I'm pleasantly surprised by how important it is, and I'm glad I was sort of introduced to that perspective as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Dia said, and I was surprised by what Dia said when she said that. Um, when I said that basically we need to have all these conflicts to really evolve, and we need to have freedom of speech, I realized that we also need to be politically correct to evolve, and we can't just always have conflict because there's always going to be conflict. Nobody can have the same opinions because everybody believes and thinks differently. So yeah, I think it's important to be politically correct as well. So yeah.
I think it's really interesting that we have these polar ideas, opposite ideas, and yet we're able to debate about it civilly. I think that is what I've taken back from this, rather than the fact that, I am on one side and the other person is on the other. Just the mere fact that we are able to communicate effectively without, any kind of stupid, harshness in our tone or in our way of behaving, which is unfortunately reflected throughout, our culture and our world. That I think is a proud achievement, even though I still do not agree with my opposition side. And I think I am allowed to do that. We can just agree to disagree. I think that is what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah, I think it was really cool that we had the opportunity to evolve our point of view across the debate instead of just needing to stick to one side. Because generally in debates, that's what it boils down to. You have to defend your side rather than listen to what the other side would like to say. And the other side does have some valuable insight to give.
Okay, so I guess we can end with that. Thank you, everyone, and I hope next time we can have a lot more people and a lot more opinions.